Hello and welcome to another screencast. This time we'll be discussing some cell basics, and when I say basics I mean really pretty basic stuff about cells for our preparation of our study of histology and some more cellular details. So this is mostly Biology 1 review stuff. I know it might be a little bit since you've had some of these things, so here we go though. You should be able to identify major cell regions, which we'll go over. And then talk a little bit about the importance of cells to physiology. Be able to identify and describe here the function of specifically three things that we'll be seeing rather regularly: the extracellular matrix, the plasma membrane or the cell membrane, and then the nucleus. And then being able to, of course, review sort of a variety of other cell structures and functions that we'll need throughout the rest of the year. And then again, just being able to talk here about the difference between a cell versus a tissue versus an organ. And then finally setting us up the four major tissue types for the rest of the study of histology. So here we go. Again, here's our organism, and we're going to break this down, the organism, into different organ systems. And then there's organ systems to the organ level. And again, we had said that most of this sort of is macroscopic, right, or gross anatomy, everything, 4, 5, and 6, that level. But then if we take an organ, we see that organs, the definition of an organ is that it's made up of different types of tissues. And when I say different, we mean at least two different types of tissues, at least two different tissues make up an organ. So if it's all the same tissue type, then it's not technically an organ. So the example that they give you here as an organ is a blood vessel, and it's going to be made up of connective tissue. It's going to be made up of smooth muscle tissue and then epithelial tissue. So these are three different tissue types. So it begs the question, sort of, what is a tissue? Well, a tissue consists of similar types of cells. And so by similar, another way to think of this is that those cells are interrelated, and their functions are interrelated to one another, such that it may sometimes the tissue may be all one type of cell, but it might be different types of cells. So if we take a bunch of cells that are similar or interrelated in their function, and we group them together, then we get a tissue, right? And so the study of tissues is known as histology. So histology is the study of tissues, and we're constantly looking under microscopes, to the joy of some of you, to the detriment of others that don't really enjoy that sort of thing. But the next few weeks here, we're going to be spending a lot of time looking at microscopes and looking at cells under those microscopes. And the question then becomes sort of, all right, why? Why? Who cares about cells? Why do we need to care? Why do we care anything about this, right? Well, up here from Bio 1, remember that a cell is the basic unit of functioning. And so understanding the physiology of the human body means an understanding of cells. Most diseases can be traced to abnormal cellular or abnormal subcellular structures and or functions. And so when the body is in dishealth, is in disease, it's typically because something is going wrong with a cell or groups of cells, right? And so again, this is just the cell theory, right, is that all living things are made of one or more cells. The cell is the basic unit of life. So by studying the basic unit, we can then expand principles that we understand about how this thing functions up to the rest of the organism. And then you get all cells from other existing cells. So again, understanding cells is the first step in understanding physiology, and sort of the microanatomy of the cells related to that physiology. So when we look at this cell, here's your basic animal cell, and you'll never really see a cell that looks like this. It's just kind of a general characteristic version of them. But I want to point out a few things that are, of course, important. The first is this plasma membrane or the cell membrane, and all membranes, wherever we see them, will separate. And so this cell membrane is going to separate the extracellular or outside extracellular fluid, the extracellular area, from the intracellular area that is within, or inside. So this plasma membrane separates outside the cell from inside the cell. Most cells in the body have a nucleus, and that nucleus is separated from the cytoplasm or the intracellular fluid by a nuclear envelope or a nuclear membrane. So they call this an envelope, but it's actually a membrane as well. And so inside of that nucleus there is the chromatin, and that's a fancy term just for the DNA or the genetic material. Genetic material. And this is where your genes are, and the expression of these genes will lead to proteins primarily that will be aiding in the function of the cell. And increasingly in medicine, we will soon be able to, well, we are now sort of on the cusp, on the verge of understanding the genome and how that functions. And the genome is the collection of all the genes in the organism. And so if diseases can be traced to abnormal cellular function or subcellular structures, such as abnormal genes, therapies for those diseases should be targeted at the genetic level for some of them, right? For some of those that are appropriate. So understanding this is a big area of research right now, understanding the genome, how it functions, and leading to sort of a specialized medicine. You may have heard about this or read about this a little bit, but this will come up a couple of different times throughout the year. So again, plasma membrane, nuclear envelope separating the cytoplasm intracellular area from the nuclear area. And then in that, moving back out of the nucleus there, you have all of these organelles that you should be remembering here from Bio 1. Again, this cytosol is the fancy term for cytoplasm, right, or the intracellular fluid, so cytoplasm, or intra, within the intracellular fluid there. And you see lysosomes and mitochondria and centrioles and microvilli and all these guys, and we will come back to these when we need them specifically for specific types of cells. But in general right now, here is your generalized animal cell, generalized cell of the body with the basic major cell areas there: the plasma membrane, nuclear envelope, nuclear membrane, nucleus, and then the cytoplasm. Just a little bit more about this plasma membrane. The plasma membrane is two-sided. It's of course made up of a phospholipid bilayer, which we see here. And again, you should remember this from Bio 1. So phospholipid bilayer. There are proteins embedded in that membrane. And on the cytosol, or the cytoplasm side, this is the inside, right, you will have these elements of the cytoskeleton here that are proteins, and they are anchoring this plasma membrane. They're going to anchor organelles, right? So this is an organelle here to the inside of the membrane. And on the outside of the membrane, it looks different. On the outside of the membrane, you have these proteins that are spanning that membrane, and you have glycoproteins and glycolipids. And these things, these green things here, help to make up the extracellular surface of the cell. And so these things will play a role in making up the extracellular matrix. They also play a role as markers of cell type. So liver cells will have different types of glycolipids and glycoproteins than kidney cells, than heart cells, than liver cells, etc. So these are ways that cells are able to distinguish one from the other. Right? This plasma membrane, again, it's going to separate, and so it will, again here, separate extracellular from intracellular regions. It regulates the transport, right, and plays key roles in the cell-to-cell communication. So cell-to-cell communication we talked about a little bit down here, and identifying self. This regulating transport, of course, we're talking about diffusion, we're talking about facilitated diffusion, and we're talking about active transport, and then a subset of diffusion, osmosis. And again, these should be reviewed from Bio 1. If they're not, you should go. If you've been a while, go back, take a look at what those things are, and as they come up in class, we'll define them a little bit more specifically for you again. But you should have a working definition or knowledge of those coming into this class. Again, I talked briefly there before about the nucleus, the genetic material, encoding information to make the proteins. Proteins play a diverse role in cellular structure and function. Okay. So I think I said enough there about that nucleus. I want to, go right to there. I want to go to this slide and just show you that most cells in the body are not sort of free floating, right? They're connected to one another. So if we take a look here, this is the cytoplasm, right? So this would be the cytoplasm, right, or intracellular area, and then here is your nucleus, and an endoplasmic reticulum, and then you have your plasma membrane right here. So this is the plasma membrane. Now the plasma membrane of this cell, let's number these. This is cell 1, this is cell 2, and in cell 3 the cytoplasm has been removed, but the plasma membrane of that cell is still in place. This is intact there, plasma membrane number 3. So what we're seeing is that these cells are actually held together by proteins, 3 types of proteins, these tight impermeable junctions. These are like the little proteins that are going to hold this cell to this cell, so cell 2 to cell 3. That's a tight junction right there. You also, that's one type. You also have desmosomes, which are larger proteins that are anchoring those two, cell 2 to cell 3. And here we see a desmosome over here as well. And then we have finally gap junctions or communicating junctions down here that allow basically the cytoplasm from one cell to move through and be continuous or contiguous with the cytoplasm of that. So you have these little connexons, these proteins that form little gaps from one cell to the next, so you can exchange information not across the membrane but directly from one cell to another. Right? And so just showing you a little bit about the relationship between one cell and the other, and that most cells in the body aren't these free-floating things that look like this, right, where they're not attached to anything else. Most cells in the body are attached in some way to another cell. Okay. Lastly, cell structures adapted for a variety of functions. And so this is sort of our first introduction to structure being related to function. Pardon me. So, for example, the cells that connect body parts together, things like these epithelial cells, or things like these fibroblasts here. So a fibroblast cell, might be a good idea to look up what blast is on that green sheet there of word roots, and then what the fibro is. But what's happening here is that this is the fibroblast cell in gray right here. And these fibroblast cells are secreting fibers, and that's what these fibers are here. These are protein fibers outside, so they secrete these proteins. And then this branching structure of the fibroblast, you see that this fibroblast is grabbing onto this fiber here and grabbing onto a fiber right there, and then it's grabbing onto this one over here. So they're sort of connecting those fibers together and creating this mesh that other cells could sort of live in there. Right? Erythrocytes are red blood cells, and these are unique because they are anucleates. They're anucleated, as there's no nucleus in there, and they will move all throughout the body. Right? Cells that cover and line the body organs. So if you're covering and lining organs, you're going to see that these cells are tightly held together. Right? So these cells touch each other very tightly and are held together by those tight junctions and desmosomes discussed in that previous slide. So you'll see epithelial cells. Epithelial cells cover and line the organs, and so if you want them to cover, it would be a good idea for them to be, sort of strung together like that. Cells that move organs and other body parts, the cells themselves will change their shape. Right? And this is supposed to be a delta, so these cells will actually change their shape to create that movement. Cells that store nutrients, right? Here's a fat cell. So here's the nucleus of this fat cell, right? Or others sometimes referred to as adipose, an adipose cell. And this lipid droplet right here is essentially in a large vacuole. And so when that fat cell fills up with more and more fat, the nucleus is kind of squished out of the way, and all the rest of the cytoplasm organelles and stuff like that are also squished out of the way, so the majority of that cell has this large vacuole that can store that fat droplet in. Right? Cells that are fighting diseases have this characteristic branching pattern here. This is a macrophage, a large eating cell. The pseudopods here will surround, right, and engulf, and then when you engulf the foreign cell, the lysosomes are going to have digestive enzymes that break that foreign cell down, and so the lysosomes protect, right, and help fight disease there. So you'd expect cells that have protection roles to have a lot of lysosomes in them. And cells that gather information and control body functions. This branching allows this cell to be in contact with lots of other cells to create a network. And then finally, a cell for reproduction. Reproduction is getting the genetic information into the next generation. And so a sperm cell is essentially a nucleus, a rather large nucleus, a very little bit of cytoplasm here, and then attached to basically a motor, a flagellum, to get this to fertilize the egg there. Right? So a couple things about this, right? That you're going to be looking at, thinking about how the structure of the cell is related to the function of the cell. And the other thing I want you to observe here is that not all cells look the same. That there's extreme variety in what the cells look like. Right? They have the basic parts there of a nucleus, a cell membrane, a cytoplasm, an extracellular side, an intracellular side, but the shapes of them are different. Right? That cells are not homogeneous, that cells are heterogeneous in their makeup. Okay? And if you can sort of keep that straight then, or think about that, then a lot of other things become a little bit easier for you later on. Okay? So again, I know that was an awful lot of information quickly there, but again, what we're trying to focus on is looking at this tissue level, again, and defining a tissue as similar types of cells. And what we're going to find is that there are 4 basic tissue levels that we're going to study. First, there are epithelial cells, or epithelial tissue. The second is connective tissue. The third type of tissue of 4 is muscle. And then the 4th type of tissue is nervous. Right? So epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. And we'll spend a lot of time in the next couple of weeks here on this epithelial and this connective, and then muscle and nervous as we get to them in their respective chapters. Okay? So, again, thanks for listening here. You should be able to sort of identify and describe, again, these several things here. Major cell regions. Importance of cells to physiology, right? So who cares? Why do we need to study cells? Why do we need to understand cells? A reason or two there would be good. Functioning of this extracellular matrix, the plasma membrane, the nucleus. Describe a variety of cell structures and functions. We went over about 6 or 7 of them there. Be able to then talk about the cell versus a tissue versus an organ, and then identifying lastly here the 4 major tissue types. Okay, thanks for listening, and bring your questions to class.